Hi, I'm Yahlin Chang, and you're listening to In Her Words.
Everyone has a story. Welcome to In Her Words, a podcast from women in entertainment where female creatives and allies share their stories in their own words.
This is a dedicated space centered on how to harness creativity for inspiring and impactful projects in the ever-changing landscape of entertainment.
I'm Renee Rossi,
I'm Gretchen McCourt.
and this is In Her Words.
Who out there is loving this last season of Handmaid's Tale? We love it, and we're so sad to see it go. The show is amazing, and we had so much fun in this conversation with Yahlin Chang. You can hear and see Yahlin's passion for the show and for telling women's stories. Over and over in her career, she finds and amplifies interesting women and has some amazing words of wisdom for aspiring writers and showrunners. This is an episode you may listen to twice. We hope you enjoy.
We are so excited you can join us. We're big fans at Women in Entertainment of your career. We've been watching.
Thank you.
It would be, I guess, to start, just, let's kind of go back a little bit and just talk about your career and, in your words, tell us a little bit about just, how you got into it and into your writing and everything, and we can kind of take it from there.
So yeah, I always wanted to be a television writer. When I was little, in elementary school, my family and I would gather around the television set every Thursday and Friday night, and we'd watch Dallas and Dynasty and Falcon Crest, and I loved
My
it.
childhood.
Yes, and we would really, that's how we kind of learned what America is.
Oh, no.
My parents were immigrants, and I just thought it was awesome. Like rich Americans seem to have like the best problems in the world. There was all this drama, but but they were in America and they were rich. So how bad could it be?
I always wondered why my mom never wore a ball gown around the house when I watched those shows. Where's your formal dress?
Right. I know. So I really just fell in love with the hour-long dramatic form that came into your living room every week, and you got to see the characters evolve over time. I thought it was like the best thing in the world. When I got a little older, I started to like more quality dramas like LA Law and China Beach, and and then I graduated college in 1994, and I was obsessed with, the NBC's Thursday night lineup. ER was just astonishing to me. And now, I mean, it is such a privilege that I never thought this would happen. But then in 2000, from 2002 to 2005, I was actually hired on ER. I got to actually work on
Oh
it,
my
which is
gosh.
just like a dream come true. I was literally texting with my boss from ER last night, Jack Orman, who had just watched my episode of The Handmaid's Tale, which aired last night, the one I sort of wrote from scratch. And also on The Handmaid's Tale, I work with Warren Littlefield, who is president
Oh my
of
gosh,
NBC when
yes.
ER came out. So, I just feel so grateful and so lucky. So I guess just quickly, my bio, then after graduating from college, I worked for Newsweek magazine. I was in the culture section. So I was like the fifth string critic for books, classical music, movies. But the whole time I was sort of really interested in writing for TV. I mean, I definitely kept like a Chinese firewall between my journalism work and, trying to do TV. But when I was in high school, I had taken a book out of the public library that said how to be a TV writer. And it was written by like one person who had written a single episode of Dukes of Hazzard. But she said in it,
Did you learn
the
everything you needed to know, Yahlin?
yeah, from that. I don't know what happened to her, but that was, it's like there was literally one book on the subject. And she said the first thing you should do is write spec scripts, and then you send it to everyone and you try to get an agent. So I wrote a spec Party of Five, which was a show I was in love with at that point. And by the way, Chris Kaiser, who created it, then I got to work with him on the negotiating committee for the WGA.
Oh my gosh.
last year. And I told him, my God, you're responsible for my wanting to become a TV writer. So that was my very first spec, was Party of Five. And then I wrote a spec Law and Order. I was told by like a friend whose babysitter when he was growing up had become an agent, and she said, oh well, this spec is great, you need one more that's like kind of like a hard spec, so I bought a bunch of Law and Order scripts from a place called Script City, and I studied them, and I wrote a Law and Order spec, and then I sent my scripts out to you know every name of agent I could find. I walked over to the WGA in New York and I got a list of agencies, and I sent like 40 letters out and I got no responses. But then I finally found out I knew a girl who knew an agent, and I was able to use her name and send my spec scripts and say, I'm really interested in becoming a TV writer. And he met me and he submitted me to the first year of what was then called the Warner Brothers Writing
Sure.
Workshop. And I got in, but I couldn't do it because I was living in New York. And at that time it was in LA. So, but that agent was willing to take me on. And that was in 2000. And then he broke me in. He got me, my very first several jobs.
Oh my gosh. Going onto the set of ER or going into the writer's room for ER, what was that like? Was that surreal?
It was, yeah, it was incredible. I really could not believe that I was there. First of all, the set, like, it looks so much smaller than you actually than it looks on TV. Um, but I I went there because I was pitching on a freelance. At that time, every sort of long running show had to have like one script for a freelance. And they brought in 5 sort of new writers to pitch on them. And I was one of them. And so I went in, I pitched, and then they actually ended up hiring me off my spec
Oh
script,
my
which
gosh.
was crazy. My sort of mentor, Jack Orman, who I was talking to last night, hired me off of that. And it's one of the people that I pitched to is this amazing writer, Meredith Steam, who I had lunch with this week. So one thing that's so great about being a television writer is that it's a small community, and you kind of get to see the same people again and again. And so these people who've been instrumental in my career and my development as a writer, I get to interact with and still have relationships with. It's wonderful.
That's such a great. I love that you're all of these like dream shows that you got to come back to
Very
them
lucky.
and be a part of them, and also the message that one of the reasons we always ask this question of like kind of how did you get there is because there's so few linear paths of for people, but I love your theme of, I mean, working hard. Like, I don't think I've ever heard a story that someone bought scripts and to model and to start writing, but just that write, work hard, and for you not having ins in the industry and not finding these connections of someone's name you could use or someone who might know an agent, and finding a site where you could buy scripts so you could actually see. But the library book of the Dukes of Hazzard person is that's that is a
In some way along the way.
right.
Your book on that one episode of Dukes of Hazzard.
That's the best.
Yeah.
That's the best. And you've worked on some amazing shows. I mean, I was looking at ER, and I love Dirty Sexy Money. I thought that was, and
Thank
Pan Am
you.
and Shades of Blue. There seems to be kind of an
Yeah.
underlying theme, and I'm curious of when you got there, of really strong women characters of Supergirl
Yeah.
and Shades of Blue and some of these, and obviously
Yeah.
then we'll get to in Handmaid's Tale, which is just kind of in a league of its own. But has your, I guess the question really is has not only has your writing evolved, but has your interest in what kind of projects you want to be a part of? How has that evolved since you started your career?
Well, yes, that has 1000% evolved. When you're starting out in your career, and for a long time as a, fledgling TV writer, you take any job that will come. You're just so excited to have a job, any job. Um, But over time, and certainly cemented with my work on The Handmaid's Tale, I've kind of come to a point in my career, thankfully, where I can pick and choose projects and only do things that are interesting to me. And the projects that come to me do tend to feature strong women. And I was just saying to a writer recently, now I've become so kind of persnickety that the moment there's a male protagonist, like a male lead, I'm a little like, I don't know. I'm just like so much more intrigued. As soon as it's a female lead, I'm like, I'm there. I'm interested. What is her life like? What are her, what are her relationships like? What does she do all day? What does she do in the morning when she moisturizes? What does she choose? It's like, I'm so fascinated I mean, I have a strong bias, but I just think women are so much more interesting than men. And I say that it is like someone who I love my husband and I have 3 boys and I love them too. Um, and I love their kind of simplicity, but in terms of like really sinking your teeth into a juicy, complex character with lots of strengths and flaws, I just find women so much more complex and fascinating.
Yeah, that we agree, and we are also the mothers of sons, so same. We love them,
Yeah.
love them dearly, but all the boy moms, we get it, we get it.
Oh, it's wonderful to be the mother of sons
Right.
because it's so simple. Yeah. They love you so much. And you
Absolutely.
love them so much. It's very uncomplicated.
It is. It's definitely. Um, and I think that, I really do. I mean, the shows, the longevity of the shows we're talking about in these female characters, I think that kind of speaks to why why does Meredith Grey last, and I'm gonna screw it up, 22-year seasons? What are we on now? 25 seasons? I don't even know, but the Meredith Greys of the world, and all of these characters, and when I mean, obviously Elizabeth Moss is so fantastic in Handmaid's Tale, but I think that speaks to the longevity of some of these shows, is because these women, they're so complex, and I mean, the story really has no end because women are so complex.
100%. I think that women have to deal with so much. There's so many external forces acting upon women, because we live in still and have a huge history of living in a patriarchy. So to some extent, we have to navigate those patriarchal tendencies, and women have to be clever because we live in a world that is still ruled by men, and there's like a scarcity mindset amongst women, which is like, if there's only so much to go around, so much power, so much influence to go around. Women have to navigate the world in a very like nuanced and subtle and complex way. And then also just the fact that you know we can be ambitious, obviously, and have careers, and that's so great. But we also have these biological imperatives that are acting upon us, and these primal desires, and you know, um, our need to care for our children, and the compassion that evolves as a result of that, and empathy, and the ability to, you know, put yourself in someone else's shoes, and also just sort of emotional language, really um, understanding and hooking into what people are feeling and what you yourself are feeling. Like, women are so much more in touch with their own feelings, which makes them more in touch with other people's feelings. And all of that is those are extremely useful tools for a writer too. So yeah, women are just so cool.
We think so too. We think so too. So with Handmaid's Tale, I can't believe I'm saying this, season 6
I
is
know.
crazy. Why do you think it's lasted so long and been so popular? And I was thinking yesterday, I was like, it's kind of the original book to screen. I mean, it really, I mean, when you think about it being, I don't even know how long before I mean, 6 seasons, but then probably 2 years before that when it was being created and that initial. So as this, I mean, now the book to screen is just, whether it's, film or whether it's series, I mean, it's everywhere, but this was really, one of the original, novels that kicked off that phenomenon, and it's lasted so long. So I'd love to hear your
No.
perspective on, why, and it stayed so relevant. I mean, obviously the acting is so wonderful, all the Emmy, awards that but the fans just still love it. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about, you spoke to the fans as you were thinking about this last year, and
Yes.
what they mean to you and what they mean to the show.
Yeah, that is such a great question. And, what I've come to realize working on the show is how much our fans and our viewers relate to the characters, to June, and see themselves in June, and it as a reflection of the struggles that they're going through, which is really interesting because the world of Gilead is so weird, and it is not, and it is so, like, on its face, it doesn't it's on its face, like, we don't have commanders, we don't have handmaids, but the fact that women can really relate to what it's like to be a handmaid, um, speaks really ill of the world, actually, and so I think the themes of being oppressed, of being silenced, of not having a voice, of not having control over your own body and your own fate, these are all things that women and our fans feel very deeply. And so that, because on some level, I too, like every time someone tells me they watch the show, I kind of am like, why? It's so stressful. Like, why do you subject yourself to it? Like, I'm always fascinated that someone would choose to watch a show that is admittedly often a very hard watch. Although, as the seasons have gone on, we have very deliberately done less and less of that. Probably because as I gained more influence over the show, be, am less and less interested in that too, in scenes of violence, and I'm much more interested in the character scenes and the relationships. I think that it is unfortunate that in many ways the real world seems to be creeping closer and closer to our show, and um, and so I think the relevance might be part of it, although it also turns people off. Like, there's a good argument to be made that we actually might have more viewers and be more of a hit if it weren't so close to real life. Because I do have lots of friends who say, I just can't watch it. It's too close to what I'm going through. It's too stressful. I can't watch it. So, of course, it's, the amazing power of Lizzie Moss and her incredible performance is part of it, but also her relationship with Serena Joy, played brilliantly by Yvonne Strahovski, that super complex female love-hate
Hmm.
relationship is very compelling. And also, I think that there's always an undercurrent, which I've tried to bring up more and more as the episodes have gone on, and certainly in this season, this feeling of you can go through just the worst things in the world and have everything taken away from you and suffer so much trauma, but you're still here and you can still survive and you're tough and you can fight back and you don't give up whatever happens to you. The worst things in the world, possibly in the world, that could happen to you, to your body, to your family, have your child taken away, you can still rise up and fight. And I think it's that theme of resilience and struggle against these huge forces that are trying to keep you down. That it's a tale that people need, not only can relate to, but really need and hopefully be inspired by.
How do you create, you know, uh, your writer's room and your team and, keeping things fresh when it's been, with the series that's gone on, how do you keep everything fresh and like you said, the story moving on and the story being relative to the real world and balance all of that in with your team in your room?
Well, we do have a wonderful writer's room that by season 6 was a mix of people who'd been there since season 1 and people who had just arrived in season
Uh-huh.
5. So new ideas are always fantastic, and the chemistry of the room is super important. Um, I feel so lucky that the way the show, it's very easy to keep a show like The Handmaid's Tale fresh because um, the world and the circumstances keep changing, even though you have the same characters, so we brought June out of Gilead in the middle of season 4, a random episode in the middle of season 4. And I think part of what makes the show powerful is that the rhythm of the show is unpredictable. So on a conventional TV show, you would say, oh my God, her coming out of Gilead, that's like huge. That's a cliffhanger. That's a season cliffhanger. And that would be the normal rhythm of TV, that you would end a season going, is she going to get out? Is she going to get out? And then you'd start the next season with her getting out. We chose to have that happen in the smack dab middle of the whole series. So episode 406, um, and then I had to, in 407, I had to essentially repilot the show, like write a new show. The show became an entirely new show once she was in Canada. So the ability to explore these different worlds like Gilead, New Bethlehem, which we created last year, Canada, also these settings. This year we have Alaska and we have a place called New Canaan, like a little spiritual town in Canada. The ability to um, create these new settings helps a lot. We have Mayday this season, so the world just keeps opening up. So you can put your characters in new worlds and new situations constantly. And it is structured very, very different from sort of your typical conventional, like procedural TV show, for example, where like the whole thing takes place in like a hospital,
Right, right.
So that has been helpful. We've invented new characters that were not in Margaret Atwood's novels. So like I wrote the introduction of Commander Lawrence, for example. He was nowhere in the novel, and he was so beautifully inhabited by Bradley Whitford that, he really has become an amalgam of like Bradley and my initial thoughts for him. And so he's, and we as writers just love, love, love writing him with that particular voice. And he's completely, singular in Gilead. So it's been, and of course, like the infusion of fresh new voices has been great. So it's been a dream. And then the other thing is that suddenly June went from being a slave in the Gilead to a refugee. So suddenly we got to tell the whole landscape of refugee
Mhm.
stories, which again is such a privilege because, if I walked into a studio today or a network today and pitched, I want to do a story about refugees and refugee stories, they would say like, no, you could never sell that,
Yeah.
but this show allows us the ability to do something like do entire seasons and stories about essentially refugees, American refugees. That is so great. You're playing in a huge geopolitical landscape too on The Handmaid's
Mhm.
Tale with about international diplomatic relations. You're talking about the environmental crisis. You're talking about, essentially the apocalypse and the end of the world, so there's just the landscape of the show is so huge and the stakes are so high. So it's actually very easy to come up with stories in those places.
When you think back, right, just in terms of growing up and watching these episodes and writing on ER and some of these 22 episode seasons. Handmaid's Tale is 10 episodes a season, and
Yeah.
putting all of that storyline and making sure all that context and content fits into you know, these 10 episodes. How does that change your writing style? Like, do you prefer
Yeah.
like more of like a 15, 16 episode type of season to just give you a little bit more runway or, what do
I
you look at
Yeah.
all of these different shows and different, periods of time of writing?
Well, I mean, I really, really loved that we had the luxury to do 10 episodes a season because that meant that every single episode could be really bespoke, like a beautiful kind of piece of art. And, you know, um, there's a way that if you can take time with it. This season, my co-showrunner Eric Tuckman and I had a real luxury because we ended up having like 2 years to think about this, almost 2 years to think about the scripts, except for a 5-month strike in the middle before we started shooting. Partly because of the strike, partly because during which we did not work, of course. But then we had 2 actresses get pregnant, and so we kept pushing our production date. And what was wonderful about that was that as a writer, of course, I'm very biased. I think that the writing and the scripts are the most important things, that you really have to get them right. But once we had those 10 scripts, we could figure out a way to shoot them in a very economical way. We knew exactly what we were shooting, so we could, do the be very smart about the budget. Um, but I love having more time to really perfect these scripts. And so this season, because we had so much time, we could really look at those 10 episodes as a whole and, kind of write them simultaneously, and make sure that everything was really coherent and that what you're seeing in the later episodes is reflected in the earlier episodes. And sometimes when you're on that kind of treadmill of like, okay, every 2 weeks I have to turn out a script and then it goes straight into production, there's not really time to do that. And so just the time to think is a wonderful luxury. And in the end, it's great for production too, because then you know where you're going. And so you can set things up in the story for the future in earlier episodes, just in terms of sets and what you choose, for props and lighting and things like that. Um, so yes, I mean, I'm so admire the efficiency. I can't believe now that, did do 22, 25 episodes a season of ER. That's crazy. But it looks like, like with the pit or, it looks like there's some shows that are getting back to that. And that is a skill, a wonderful skill too, because you sort of know what has to happen. That the benefit of a procedural is that, you have like cases of the week or, what that formula is. With a serialized drama like The Handmaid's Tale, you don't have that in your story toolkit. You don't have a case of the week. You don't have like a franchise. You have just characters and story and sort of what happens to them the next day and what happens to them the next day. So it's a very different process.
It's so interesting. When you were saying, I was just realizing when in the world of streaming these days, we as consumers, we don't, I guess, I don't know, maybe it's just me. I don't think about if I watch something and the season's over and it's like, well, we don't know when the next season will be, or the next season's a year, or the next season's 3 months, but growing up, like we were talking about all these shows that we watched, we knew exactly September 1st, that new season was starting and it was going until June. And then I know if you said the word reruns to kids these days, they'd be like, what in the world's a rerun?
Yeah,
But it's, just that, we're so accepting now of the different timelines of seasons starting and, with all the streamings, that's a completely different world,
I
than,
know.
than and obviously even the network shows that are still on the something different acceptance that they have.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think for sure it can be frustrating for viewers. I know
Yeah,
the big gap between seasons for our viewers
right.
was frustrating, although it's like wonderful that they care. Thank God they care. Thank God we have lots of
Yeah,
viewers
that
who
they're going to
care
stick
and are like,
around.
when's the
Yeah.
next season? Oh my God, why is it taking you so
Yeah.
long? I mean, as an artist behind the scenes, it's wonderful to be able to have this time. Even the people who are the best at making those 22 episode a season shows will admit that it's hard to make every single episode amazing. Like that's been generally acknowledged that if you're doing 22, 25 episodes and you're producing them in 9 months, like you're going to have one or two that kind of are not so great, you know? But we did work really, really hard. And we had the time to make every episode of The Handmaid's Tale great, or something about it great, you know?
Yahlin, how do you decide to end a series?
Yeah, that's
How do you
really
make
good
that
question.
decision? Because like you said, you've gone beyond the novel, you've created new characters, you've created new worlds. Is
Yeah.
that like, you're shutting down one of your kids? This has been so near and dear. How do you make that decision?
I know, I know. It's well, I mean, I think it was before we started season 5. We talked to Bruce Miller, who created the show. And, you know, I think that he was like, I think we have 2 more seasons in us, you know?
Just to
So that was part of it, but also, and then once you could kind of, know that, because we always had the question, we're so lucky because we had the luxury of Hulu saying to us, do as many as you want, or,
mm,
you decide. Um, I think it's so funny. I think it's just this very amorphous kind of feeling, it was, I mean, it's funny because, Lizzie Moss, the star of our show, has talked about this too. That before we started this season, actually, Lizzie and Warren Littlefield, our producer, did come to me and Eric Tuckman, our co-showrunner, and they said, you want to do a season 7? What do you think of a season 7? And, I feel like, Eric and I discussed it, and because we weren't instantly filled with ideas for a season 7, we didn't pursue it, Although I have to say that right now, um, saying goodbye to the show has been painful, just because we don't know, it's lightning in a bottle, these shows. And so the chemistry of this amazing crew, these writers, this amazing production staff, our amazing, production design and casting people and everything, and our actors, you just don't know that it's all going to come together again. So I do still feel like, now sort of I have the glimmers of like, what if we did a season 7? Who knows? It's like, I mean, of course, this is permanently, officially the end of The Handmaid's Tale. This is very much the final season.
I thought you were giving us a
But
scoop there.
and,
A little glimmer of hope.
yeah, but yeah, saying goodbye has been hard, so I don't know. We'll see.
Yellen, what do you watch and read in your downtime? Is it, what does that look like for you?
Well, I've been reading a lot about authoritarian regimes, unfortunately.
So just light reading.
Yeah, light
What was your
reading. I do watch a lot of TV. I watch a lot of comedies, because watching comedies is a way to give my like writer brain a rest. It's very hard for me to watch dramas without sort of knowing exactly what's happening in the writer's room behind the scenes, and, wondering about their choices and seeing the index cards on the board, So it takes like a really phenomenal drama to get me out of that. My kids and husband like sometimes hate watching TV with me because I'll always predict what the next line will be. I can just feel it, and I'll say, and they're like, "How did you know that?" But and generally I like watching things that I can watch with my kids. So, um, like Ghosts, and I don't know, Agatha all along, and the WandaVision. I really enjoyed watching that with my family. But stuff that's like really far away, from my family and I, we really enjoyed Severance. But again, Severance is a little bit close to the hour-long drama. It kind of has a handmaidsy feel too, and that sort of oppressive, big brothery atmosphere. So while it's a great show, it still feels a little bit like work to me. And so randomly, a friend of mine suggested, just reading wise, what's in my Kindle. There's a book by a book with Joan Didion's letters to her husband describing her therapy sessions, which is really fun, called Dear John, which because I love the feeling of like getting to know someone's secrets,
Right, right.
and reading personal letters. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to write that one down. I love Joan Didion. Well,
Yeah.
Yahlin, it was so nice meeting you. We're huge fans of the show. We are
Thank
count
you.
us among the group that are sad that it's ending this year. But it was so nice meeting you and getting your insight into your writing and into the show because we are huge fans.
Oh, thank you. It's so lovely to talk to you. Thank you for inviting me on the podcast. I'm very honored to be here.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for listening to In Her Words. We hope you'll join us at womeninentertainment.com and go to our Substack for extended interviews and behind the scenes access.